just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods. Yeah, one in particular, I'm just a messenger. Let me just pass on the rock. Browning, Brunning, Bruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you, you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box, and you cannot compare them at all. So don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, yeah. Fantasy round table, come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, woo. Fantasy round table, come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast. We are back after our little winter break. The Super Bowl now well in the rear view. So too is the Combine. We will be talking about what we saw at the Combine, but we will also be talking about some of the latest news. The new league year kicks off next week, so plenty to get excited about. Dennis, did you miss football the last few weeks?
Well, you know, I'm an old married guy, and football is my salvation. But as football sort of disappeared, my wife was like, hey, we should paint the bathroom. And I'm like, sounds like a great idea. So I'm putting a new floor in the bathroom. Because, you know, how can you paint without replacing the floor, right? And then I had to deal with the plumbing, and she's like, well, I'd like to let's change out the vanity. I'm like, no, maybe we just change the doors. We got it painted. I got the toilet all back installed. Now, granted, I didn't work on it during the week, so it took a couple weekends. Like the tank kept leaking, so I changed the bolts with the rubber washers on them and put a new seal on the tank, and I'm like, and it still leaked. And I was like, dang it. And I'm going through. And I'll be darned if it wasn't about 4 days into trying to figure that out. I noticed this crack in my toilet tank. I'm like, son of a gun. My tank cracked. So I had to replace the toilet too. You know, the flooring is great.
I'm surprised you didn't have to change the toilet from the jump, you know. But
yeah.
It kind of sounds like it was the first Sunday without football. My wife, you know, even though she had kind of watched the Super Bowl and she knew the Super Bowl was on, Sunday after, she's like, there's no NFL games today? I'm like, no, the season's over. Okay, I have some things we can do. So, you know, we ended up, I took her to PF Chang's. She wanted to get her Chinese fix. And then we went to a lot of furniture stores. So,
well, we're getting new carpet. So, you know, we've been picking out carpet, going back, taking the new flooring and saying, hey, we want to change, you know, let's change this color. So this morning, I went into work a little bit late because I had to wait for the installers to come out and measure the 3 bedrooms that are getting new carpet so I could find out how much of my tax money was going for that.
Your post-Super Bowl time sounds a little more expensive than mine's been so far. But so far, I'm going to...
You know the mantra...
Happy life.
Happy life.
Yeah. So we'll see. We both took some time off next week, so be curious to see what projects emerge. Next week going to be a big one for NFL and for people that are hoping to get a payday and find a new team. At least 4 guys are going to get a payday, but may not find a new team. That is the franchise tag. Today was the deadline. The Cowboys tagged George Pickens, wide receiver. Not a big surprise. That's been rumored since the season. A couple of these were mild surprises for me. The Falcons tagged Kyle Pitts at tight end. It never seemed like they knew what to do with Kyle Pitts, although I will stay with Stefanski there, somebody who is notable for doing good things with the tight end. Maybe that makes more sense.
I wish I was notable for doing good things with a tight end.
Well, that one makes a lot more sense than the Jets tagging Brees Hall, since they essentially feel like they spent the last 2 years pretending that he didn't exist. He does get the non-exclusive tag, so other teams can provide an offer, but if they signed him, they'd have to surrender 2 first-round picks. And I don't know about you, Dennis, but I think that's what we might call cost prohibitive for even a good running back.
I think so. I'm a big Brees Hall fan, but 4 years into his career with one injury, one real pretty bad injury where he missed a bunch of time, and I don't think I'm willing to. Yeah,
Well, because you're going to have to give him a monster contract too. That's one that the Jets are not willing to match, and you have to give them
in
the
the
two
corporate
first.
world, they'd call that the old poison pill.
Yeah. So, but the one that's the most interesting, the Colts were trying to decide. They want Alec Pierce back. They obviously want Daniel Jones. They weren't able to get a deal done with either, but you can only pick one. They put the transition tag on Daniel Jones. Fascinating because it just gives them the right to match any offer he gets out there. And part of me wonders if they just did that because it seems like they're kind of far apart in a number of reports where the Daniel Jones asked for a salary figure that was shocking to the Colts, whatever shocking to the Colts is. So putting the transition tag, they could match it if they wanted to, but maybe that was their way of saying you won't see that number you're looking for from somebody else. So that'll be curious. But it puts them in a weird position. They had hoped to get a long-term deal done with Alec Pierce. They still have a few days since you can negotiate with your own free agents. But do any of I mentioned a couple of the tags were mildly surprising to me. I think the biggest fantasy bummer for me is Brees Hall, because we were very excited not only for him to get the chance to play somewhere else, but from a fantasy perspective. From a fantasy perspective, I think Pitts could still be good in Atlanta with Stefanski. Pickens obviously looked good opposite CeeDee Lamb in Dallas. I think Daniel Jones had one of his best career years with the Colts, so I don't think it makes a big deal if they stay in those places. Brees Hall, that does bum me out.
Well, and at face value, I tend to agree. That being said, it wouldn't be completely out of the question for that team to turn around. They've got to solve quarterback. Well, Kyler Murray's out there now. That gives them a little better option. As much as I dislike Kyler Murray, I'd certainly take him over Justin Fields at this point. A new offensive coordinator and Frank Reich. Not a gigantic fan of Reich, but he's a solid. I guess the reason I'm not a huge fan is that he's not Ben Johnson. He's not, Mike McDaniel. He's not breaking new ground. He does what he does, and it's kind of, that Frank Reich, Matt Nagy, those kind of guys that just are okay, but they're not rewriting the rules of the game like some of these other coordinators. But they could, if they've got a good receiving core with Mason Taylor and Garrett Wilson. If they bring back Mechie and
they have Adonai Mitchell, who they went and got, who's still on a rookie deal. Yeah, it doesn't encourage me that Aaron Glenn turned over all of his staff and then nodded off during the combine. If there was a team that needed to really maximize its draft scouting,
not like he was bombing Iran. I mean, give the guy a break to take a nap. All right.
Well, you mentioned Kyler Murray. I'm going to jump to this next bit. We have a few quarterbacks who are veterans.
Before we go, I've got a question. I wasn't aware you could either transition or franchise. I thought they were two different things, and you could do both of them.
I did too. I thought you could use both of them. That must have been an update in the most recent collective bargaining, because I feel like a team in the past has used the transition and franchise tag. Right. But Adam Schefter right away said that prevented them from being able to use any other kind of tag, which is good because it is kind of cheaty. Players don't love the franchise tag and the franchise tag process. And it does feel a little bit cheating if you can do 2 of them to your players, like, get better at negotiating, get better at managing your cap, get better, we all have to make decisions in our household, like, if you had 2 bills due, you couldn't just, decide to put one of them on an indefinite hold until you get around to it. So, I guess that
No,
makes
you
it
have to
good.
pay both of them. You could franchise tag one, and you could, transition tag the other.
Well, and it looked like the transition tag, the other benefit of doing that is it cheaps down the tag number, because I
Yeah.
saw the quarterback number being less than what the running back number was, and I'm like, oh, because they used the transition tag. So that's another. I don't know if that's going to help them with negotiations. Because you didn't even.
Well, I mean, I'm sure if I'm Daniel Jones, I go in and I'm like, hey, I want all of the money. And they're like, well, we can't do that. I'd be like, have you seen Anthony Richardson play? Give me all the money.
Well, speaking of Richardson, so I mentioned a few quarterbacks. So Kirk Cousins, they've announced they plan to release him by March 11th, which is next Wednesday, which is the start of the new league year. Anthony Richardson has been given permission to seek a trade. Wish you all the best. Tua Tagovailoa, they are going to designate him a post-June 1 cut. That usually means you're free right at the beginning of the league year, but it helps with the financial hit. And just today, the Cardinals released Kyler Murray. So probably all guys we thought would potentially be on the move. I'm not sure, what are they going to ask for Richardson? But of the 4, he would be the least appealing to me because can't stay on the field, managed to break his own eye socket while he was warming up for a game that he was going to be a backup. And you'd have to give up something in addition to paying him. I think a lot of people think Cousins is going to go back to the Vikings, which would make some sense. But I'm curious the others. You mentioned the Jets. People have talked about the Jets for Kyler Murray. Tua, somebody's going to take him because there's a dearth of quarterbacks. But
I saw something that linked him to Atlanta.
And, which might not be bad because, Atlanta's going to have to do something. And Tua's a left-handed mobile passer, so you could basically leave your offensive setup the same for when and if Michael Penix is healthy. I just don't think Penix is going to be ready to start the season. But no. Atlanta is going to take some kind of a dead cap hit for Cousins, so that might be a good, Tua, I think, is still getting paid a massive payday from the Dolphins, even post being released. So you could see like a Russell Wilson type situation where he takes a veteran minimum or $1 million deal right out of the gate to kind of do a rehab, maybe a 1-year stint in Atlanta because they still believe in Michael Penix. That would make probably the most sense because they're similar play styles and both left-handed passers.
Yeah, Penix has a significantly bigger arm, but he Tua, I think, is more accurate than Penix. But the whole left-handed thing, that's why I thought they should.
It does make it does help when you're crafting an offense if both your starter and your backup have a similar skill set and throw with the same hand, because then you don't have to reorient. Well, or Lamar, when they put Cooper Rush behind him.
Right.
That never made sense to me, and that looked god-awful last year when they did it.
It did. So I agree with you. I think if I'm Kirk Cousins, I want to go somewhere. I know the clock is ticking on my career. Go where I'm going to be familiar with it. The quarterback situation is kind of in flux. They spent high draft capital, but by and large, it's reported all over that they're not happy with J.J. McCarthy's development. And so that makes sense. He's got Justin Jefferson, T.J. Hawkinson. We'll see what happens with the run game there. Obviously, with Cousins, you need to make sure he's protected because he's a statue. But Brian Flores up there, meaning they're going to have a really good defense, so Cousins doesn't have to do a ton to be able to get to the playoffs. So that makes a lot of sense. And he'll collect some money from Atlanta for going away. And so he doesn't necessarily have to try to maximize where he signs next. Richardson, that's going to be a weird one. It's you've got to find that coach that says, I can save this guy. I can make him a quarterback. I don't know where that's at. Kyler, we've been noted not huge fans of Kyler's play style. While he can produce for fantasy in stretches, he tends to just not be a great NFL quarterback. And then I did see today that there was some talk about Garoppolo being linked to Miami, which I don't know who that serves.
I saw him being linked to Arizona, which would make some sense because his offensive coordinator with the Rams is now Arizona's head coach.
Right. I just don't know what Garoppolo has left. He never got a chance to really blossom because every time he seemed to get a shot, he got injured. And now he's 35 years old. It seems like he seemed to get old fast.
Well, he always was seemingly injured. 34. He'll turn 35 in November.
So there's a lot of questions, and now there's talk too that San Fran isn't real keen on trading Mac Jones. They're like, we're probably going to try to get a first for him. I don't think you can get that. I think they would probably trade him for less than that. But obviously you're going to set the market as high as you can. And if a quarterback needy team is out there, maybe they do give you something high.
Well, and I think a lot of this speculation and interest too stems from the fact that it's not a draft where you think you're going to find a lot of ready-made answers. Fernando Mendoza seems to be there. We'll talk about the combine later. I was curious, the interview, Garrett Nussmeier is a guy who didn't have a particularly good last year. It was fascinating to me that in his combine interview, he came right out and said he got hurt before the first game and had to play through a major injury all year. Feels like laying the groundwork. I know Alabama's quarterback thinks he's ready to start for the NFL. Didn't seem like the NFL scouts thought the exact same thing. So, I think we're going to see a lot of patching around. I'm still waiting. We were promised that Aaron Rodgers was going to make a decision by the time the new league year starts, which, if we're really going when free agency kind of starts, that's Monday. The league year officially starts Wednesday, but the legal tampering period is Monday. And you even start hearing rumblings of deals that are coming as early as Sunday, which means he's kind of on the clock. And I think we've all assumed he's going to go back because he seemed interested in playing one more year and McCarthy's there. But if he doesn't, Pittsburgh becomes an interesting player in all this too, because they obviously have kind of a big opening and a need. And I don't know what kind of, quarterback, he would want, but they were a team that was good enough last year to make the playoffs, and McCarthy was good enough most of his time in Dallas to make the playoffs. So that would be probably a more appealing opening for some of these veterans who don't have very much time on the clock than like the Jets or the Cardinals. I mean, the Cardinals, you saw 3 teams in your division go to the playoffs. 2 of them were in the NFC Championship. 1 won the Super Bowl. That is a big hill to climb.
It is. Now, what I've heard with Pittsburgh, what I've read, is that because of where they pick, they don't, and what this quarterback class looks like, they're not necessarily in the quarterback market. They have to feel that whoever is available is going to have more upside than Will Howard. And once you get past Mendoza, I don't know how sold I am on Simpson or Nussmeier. Drew Aller has the physical tools, but he never put it together at Penn State, and he's coming off an injury. Taylor Green made some big noise with his combine, but it doesn't feel like there is a huge opportunity unless it's truly a Brock Purdy story, some late rounder just blossoming, or Dak Prescott, who was a 4th rounder, went to Dallas, and then Tony Romo got hurt. Unless it's a story like that, it doesn't feel like outside of Mendoza, there's a quarterback in this class.
Yeah, so definitely going to be something of a challenge. A couple running backs found new homes, or at least new deals. Javonte Williams re-signing with the Cowboys, 3 years, $24 million, takes a running back off the free agency board. Was a great fit, posted career highs with Dallas, seemed to be a great fit in that scheme. And then some sad news for those of us that like Detroit. David Montgomery dealt to the Houston Texans. The Detroit Lions get back Juice Scruggs, an offensive lineman, a 26th 4th-round pick, a 27th 7th-round pick. I think this told me two things. One, we don't know what Houston's philosophy is on offensive line, because for the second year in a row, they're dumping linemen, because they also traded Titus Howard to the Cleveland Browns. He's their starting tackle for a 5th. And Juice Scruggs, who is one of their better interior linemen, went to Detroit. But they brought back Montgomery. I like Montgomery potentially back there paired with Woody Marks. I think it also tells me what I've had a sneaking suspicion about is that we may have seen the last of Joe Mixon. This injury continues to be very mysterious.
An injury? I mean, did he get abducted by aliens?
Well, I would like to see a picture of him that shows that he still has both his feet, because I'm starting to wonder, did he have an accidental amputation or something? But I'm seriously wondering
with his feet.
I'm seriously wondering if we ever see Mixon play another down for anyone, because they were very complimentary to say it wasn't his fault, there's nothing you could do about it. But to have no knowledge, no one's heard from Joe Mixon, your alien theory might also be apt. But I think he's definitely done in Houston.
Yeah, I'm not looking for Mixon to make a comeback. I mean, it's a weird situation, and someday I'm sure there'll be a Netflix special on it. I love the Javonte Williams signing in Dallas. I think I agree with you. He fit that offense really well. I wouldn't have been surprised if they moved on, because you just don't know with Jerry. And, we're going into another offseason where he's already talking, we're going to be active. We're going to be active. And I don't think I'm going to be surprised if franchise tagging Pickens and re-signing Javonte Williams is all they do. But it's a 3-year deal. I think it's $16 million guaranteed. I love that for Javonte. $12 million dead cap after the 2026 season. So if they decided, he goes out and looks like a 1-year wonder and they wanted to get out of it, it's not super, super expensive. If they get rid of him after 2 years, it's only $3.6 million dead cap. So there's opportunity here for both teams to come out winners, regardless of both sides to come out winners, regardless of how it goes on the field. Montgomery, he was my guy coming out in that class. I liked him. I think he's had a strong career. Feels like he's gonna be sort of the 2-down grinder. They're gonna still try to use Woody Marks, who was really strong in the receiving game. And with Montgomery's receiving ability, it's not like they'll be able to telegraph, when this guy's in there, they're definitely running, or when Marks is in there, they're definitely passing, because Marks is a capable runner and Montgomery is a good pass catcher. But we saw in Detroit with Jahmyr Gibbs, you've got somebody that has a lot more burst and a lot more speed, a lot better in the open field, then use them there. So it feels like Montgomery is going to end up being a little bit touchdown dependent. $9 million or $6 million cap hit in 2026, 9 million in 27. And Detroit eats all the dead cap for the Montgomery contract. So, if it doesn't work out this year, Houston's scot-free. The downside of it, I think, if I'm Houston, is you're trading away offensive linemen in Scruggs and Howard. Well, you got back a pick for Howard, so that makes sense. But you gave away 2 picks with Scruggs. It felt like they bought the contract is what they really traded for, was the contract. So it could be a one and done in Houston for David Montgomery, an opportunity for Woody Marks to come in, continue to earn the role, grow into it, and be the guy next year. But for a team that needs offensive linemen, giving away those 2 draft picks just felt. But they have a ton of cap
space,
so they can go get free agent offensive linemen. Maybe they
they keep rebuilding their line every year, and because they basically imploded their line last year. We were like, what the hell are they doing? And they made some strides, but it wasn't very great during this year. And then they traded away guys who seem like the best of what they currently have. I don't understand the thought process.
I don't either. Let me go see who Houston's projected starting lineup is right now. So right now it would be Ariante Ursary, a second rounder last year, left tackle. Jarrett Patterson, a 6th rounder in 23 at left guard. Jake Andrews signed. He was waived by New England and signed. Ed Ingram at right guard, and Trent Brown at right tackle, who was an undrafted, unrestricted free agent from Cincinnati. So they need some offensive linemen. So they should be dipping heavily into the free agent market on the offensive line. That being said, we thought that last year too, after they traded away, who was the smoker? Laramie Tunsil, and let another offensive lineman go. I don't know. We'll have to see.
Yeah, and they didn't make a lot of big moves, but I also didn't think that their team was that great. And, for both Detroit and Cleveland, acquiring offensive linemen makes sense. It seems like Titus Howard might be a fit at right tackle. I know Jack Conklin, they like him, but he's never seemingly healthy. And Juice Scruggs can go in there. Detroit released Glasgow, I think, today. So, they obviously need some help in the middle. And we'll see. Jahmyr Gibbs had really taken over and dominated touches. I know he's bummed to lose his backfield mate, and I thought they made a good pairing, but it's probably easier to replace the kind of battering ram that Montgomery represented than it would be to replace Jahmyr Gibbs' skill set. And Detroit certainly needed help up front to make things.
If Detroit could go get the dude from Green Bay, what was his name?
Emmanuel Wilson.
Emmanuel Wilson. He's a free agent. He's 220 pounder. Big guy. He could slot right in there like Montgomery did. He's used to being a backup. So they've still got. Was it Craig? Somebody, I forget the name.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. Another in the wide receiver ranks, Tyreek Hill was released, part of a purge from the Dolphins. I find it hard to believe he's going to have a big market. He's 32. His career was predicated on speed and being a deep threat. He's coming off of a brutal injury and getting older, and has a lot of off the field issues. I laughed so hard when I read the report the Patriots have no interest in Tyreek Hill because they're afraid if he and Stephon Diggs were on the same team, they'd get into fights in the locker room over women.
Right.
So I mean, that kind of tells you where Tyreek Hill is at his state. Everybody said this was him, going right back to the Chiefs. But it doesn't seem like the Chiefs want to add to their woes because they already have their own head case in Rashee Rice. So do you think there is a big market for Tyreek Hill?
I don't. I think he is a post week 1 signing for somebody, because they won't have to guarantee his contract, and he's coming off the injury. He's going to be limited with that. And so I think I think he ends up somewhere at some point during the season. I just don't think it's going to be, he's going to have to wait for a spot to open up because of injury, or after week 1. So his contract doesn't end up being guaranteed. So, he wasn't, he had hit the point in his career where he was flashing more than he was being consistent. And when you're a 5'10" receiver that, relies on a particular skill set, and that skill set starts to fade, it's easy to look at the off-field stuff and go, yeah, we're okay here for now.
For the Bears, a little bit of bad news as center Chris Dahlman, after only 5 seasons in the NFL at 27, has retired. Kind of a blow for a Bears team. They're kind of up and coming. Their line was kind of coming together. He was a free agent they had acquired last offseason, back to square one for Chicago. What do you make of that?
It kind of reminded me when I first saw it of Chris Borland, who, I don't know what Dahlman's off-field interests are, or who was John Frank, the former San Francisco tight end of yore, who played a few seasons and then said, I'm going to go to medical school instead. So Dahlman may have stuff going on off the field. Chris Borland basically said, I don't believe you can protect me from head injuries, and so I'm going to stop playing. And Dahlman may very well be somewhere in the middle of those two things, and just decided that, he's tired of getting beat up. He's been playing since he was a kid, and now he'd like to get on with the rest of his life in as healthy a fashion as he can. God bless you. Go do your thing.
Yeah. And then probably a bit of sad news while we were away. Rondale Moore, wide receiver who played for the Cardinals, the Falcons, lately the Minnesota Vikings, seemed snake bitten the last couple of years with major injuries that took him out before he even really got going, has passed away. Some nice tributes from teammates. Always a tough thing to see. He was only 25 years old.
Yeah, it was. I don't know all the details. It was reported a little bit that it was a suicide, but I know he owned Ohio State when he was at Purdue, and he broke my heart playing for Purdue. I think he was very much a role player in the NFL. At his size, it was tough to be able to have the kind of prominence that he had in college. And then when you start to pile on the injuries that he was having, it can weigh on a person. So I feel for his family. You never want to see somebody go out when they could have gotten help. But, the world we live in today, we see things happen like this, and some people just are resistant to, doing the right. I don't even want to say doing the right thing. I think that mischaracterizes it. Some people just are unable to get to that point where they can ask for help. Interestingly enough, we have a local sports radio guy here in Columbus who's been very open about his issues with depression and things like that. And he'll talk about it on the radio. And it's kind of a running gag on the show about, how he takes medication and stuff. But he does a lot of work in the community with the services that support mental health and stuff like that. So it's, there are a lot of resources out there. And if you're having bad thoughts, make a call, talk to somebody.
Well, the big event that we've had between the time we were last with you and now is the NFL Combine. Took place last Thursday to Sunday. Days of drills for all the draft prospects. I thought it was a relatively quiet combine compared to some years. But we'll talk about some of the winners or guys that stood out and losers. And I think we'll start with some winners. Two of the names that seem to jump out and really improve their stock in kind of fantasy positions is Kenyon Sadiq, the tight end, who was really the talk of everything. Tight ends were one of the earliest groups to go on Friday. And then among running backs, I think Mike Washington Jr., who really impressed with his 40 time, was probably not a guy that I heard mentioned a lot before the combine, but now a lot of people have him in that kind of 2 or 3 running back role. Jeremiah Love had a good combine, was always kind of the running back one, probably the number one in most rookie rankings heading into the
pretty well locked up that number one
into the draft. But we're aside from those guys, or including those guys, who stood out to you?
I have Love on my list here. He looked really good in the passing drills. He's got bell cow size, ran a 4.39 40. I think all of that shows up on tape for him. Mock drafts, I'm seeing him going 8 to New Orleans. I don't know if they'll have the guts to take a running back that high. Kellen Moore is creating the team in his image, and I'm curious to see what's that going to look like as they transition out of, are they going to be able to get out of salary cap hell? What's going on with Alvin Kamara? How long is he got left on the Saints? They like Devin Neal, but he suffered injury last year. Grabbing a bell cow at 8 for New Orleans would certainly be something. To me, a guy that surprised a lot was Lorenzo Styles, and I know he's a defensive player, but he wasn't being drafted in 7-round mocks. I was seeing, I wasn't seeing him selected. And then he ran a 4.26 or 4.28 40, and all of a sudden people were like, hey, well, he did return that kickoff for a touchdown in that one game. And while he did play some wide receiver when he first went into college, and now there's this, I think he ends up being a special teamer, nickelback kind of guy. I forget the dude's name that played for the Chargers a while back. He was out of Iowa, but defensive back. He was a smaller guy. Styles has decent size. I think he's over 6 foot, about 195 pounds, but he can return kicks and punts. And if you have him out there on the defensive side when you're kicking or punting, you can run a fake with him. And I don't think he's gonna, by any stretch of the imagination, morph into a Travis Hunter type of role. But he could, if you're in a league that plays with some special team points, he's a guy that could provide some Rashid Shaheed type of explosiveness from the kick returning spot. He's not terribly instinctive as a defensive back. I think he ends up doing that, special teams, but he has the potential to be a guy in the league for 8 or 10 years with that role. Another
is Desmond King, who you're thinking of.
That is exactly who I'm thinking of. I thought Ty Simpson threw the ball pretty well. He talked about, the first 5, 6, 7, 8 games he played, he looked pretty good. And then as the season went on, his play, his accuracy got worse. He talked about some injuries that he had, oblique injuries and whatnot. that he had to play through. And, for whatever it's worth, he's being projected potentially to go to the Rams in the 20s. He could be the second QB off. I'm not going to be surprised if there's only one quarterback drafted in the first round this year.
It does feel like he's pretty comfortably settled into the QB2 for the draft, but I'm with you. This feels a little bit more like the Kenny Pickett year than some of these other years.
Yeah, well, let's just hope Fernando Mendoza is better than Kenny Pickett.
Yeah, well, I didn't mean in quality, but like that was a year where only one quarterback.
Another thing that stood out to me, 11 wide receivers ran under a 4.4. So there's a lot of speed coming into the league this year.
Yeah, and wide receiver among the fantasy positions does seem to be the best overall. Most that I'm guessing that's going to pretty well dominate.
Yeah, there are
rookie draft
at running back and tight end, but wide receiver has a lot more depth.
And I'll be curious to see where some of these guys go from. A lot of the mocks I've seen, whereas the last couple of years we've gotten excited about quarterbacks and receivers and that dominating in the first round. Last year, obviously, or 2 years ago, we had the 6 quarterbacks go in the first round. This seems like it might be more of a lineman defenders draft, because for fantasy purposes, we don't talk a ton about defenders, but I know there were quite a few defenders that made strides. Your linebacker out of Ohio State, Sonny Styles, seems to be a player that boosted their stock through the combine. And it looks like there are a lot of teams that could use boosts, over the middle at pass rush and always in the secondary. So that could be a heavier kind of first round allocation. Well, let's talk about the flip side. I didn't see a ton of players that totally bombed out on drills and killed themselves. But one interesting one that has come out afterward is Makai Lemon. And it's not because of his combine necessarily, but there have been a lot of reports about how badly he fared in interviews. Do you put a lot of stock in that? Do you think that can end up tanking somebody when it comes to their draft position?
I think it can cause some teams to take you off their board or move you down their board. You have to look at the tape and figure out what does this guy look like in my offense? Can he produce? Does he have a solid role? Lemon's a pretty good wide receiver. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. But, George Pickens was an odd duck in the process, and I think that caused him to fall a little bit. But Pickens has played really well since he's been in the NFL, and he hasn't been, there are times when it certainly looks like he's not given maximal effort, but he put up some shit last year. He put up some numbers. So we'll see where that is. It was interesting. Brandon Beane was on the combine when the wide receivers were running. And did you see that? So Carnell Tate ran, and Beane was there, and Tate ran a 4.56 unofficial time, and Rich Eisen and I forget who was with him there. Eisen were like, oh, that we didn't expect that out of Carnell Tate. We expected faster, and without missing a beat, Brandon Beane goes, yeah, that guy's slow. You should probably not draft him.
Well, I mean, Beane seems to have gotten bailed out for some curious draft decisions, but it also, I don't know what Buffalo wants to do. I mean, everyone wants to have them either making a trade for AJ Brown or signing a big time receiver or taking a receiver in the first round. But we've said that they needed to get a wide receiver for the last 3 years. And who hasn't really thought they needed to get a wide receiver is Joe Brady, who's now suddenly the head coach overall.
Right.
I'm not sure that he does think that they need more. I mean, the first thing he did after getting the job was talk about how much he loved Keon Coleman and how it was going to be the best thing to happen to Keon Coleman was him being the head coach because he was going to feature him as a number one receiver. And I couldn't help but think to myself, I'm like, well, it's great because you didn't have any control over making that happen. Wait a minute.
Right.
So
I think Carnell Tate, there's definitely two lines of traffic out there when it comes to him. There's some guys that are like, oh, see, look, he isn't fast. He only had those numbers because he was across from Jeremiah Smith. And then there's the other lane that's like, no, watch the tape. He plays fast. He runs good routes. He catches the ball well. He's going to be just fine. You don't need to run a 4-2 to play wide receiver in the NFL because we've had lots of 4-2 guys run at the combine, and none of them have really panned out as wide receivers in the NFL. So, Carnell Tate, 6'3", 195. They're only going one digit. It's going to show 4.5. That's plenty fast enough. Will he be CeeDee Lamb? Will he be A.J. Brown? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe he's that second fiddle, or maybe he's that just really good guy, not that perennial all-pro. Another guy.
ESPN's mock draft had Carnell Tate going to the Chiefs, which was interesting.
Well, I think Patrick Mahomes would love Carnell Tate. He has something that most of the other receivers there don't. He's 6'3".
They're also pretty one-dimensional in the kind of receivers that they have right now, aside from Rice. And every day you have to wonder if Rice is even going to be available for you, because it seems like he and Jordan Addison are a race to the bottom of who can have the worst headlines off the field.
Somebody's got to be the new Tyreek Hill.
I mean, Tyreek's vying to stay the same Tyreek Hill, and Stephon Diggs said, hold my beer. What else do I got to do? I had more kids than catches in the Super Bowl last year.
So another guy that I felt like dinged himself a little bit was Emmett Johnson. Good running back in college, decent size, but he ran slow. He ran a 4.6. I went and did a little bit of digging, and he kind of comps to Kyren Williams. He actually is a little more athletic than Kyren Williams. It's going to come down to, if you're going to run a 4.6, you got to be like Kyren Williams or like David Montgomery. You have to have exceptional vision. Is Emmett Johnson going to be able to deliver that? I think he ends up being, a 5th-round pick, somewhere in that range. So there'll be no pressure on him. He can go in, he can learn the ropes, he can move his way up the depth chart without having to face a ton of pressure. There were some guys that I thought showed well at the combine. Mike Washington was one. He played at New Mexico State. He played 3 years at Buffalo. Fantastic size-speed combo. A little bit questionable on the vision. He did catch 28 passes last year. In 5 years of college, he caught 73 passes. His size-speed combination is going to get him on the field somewhere. Will he be able to see the field well enough to stake out a claim as a 1A or a bell cow? That's going to be something we'll have to keep an eye on. But I think he established, I think he planted his flag as the RB2.
I've seen some have him as RB2, some have Singleton from.
Yeah, I keep seeing Singleton way down, like 6, 7, 8. And I've watched Singleton for 4 years at Penn State, and he's a good back. He's not twitchy and explosive. So I think he gets dinged a little bit for that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
I'm curious. to see where Tylen Green goes, the quarterback. 6'6", 227 pounds, ran a 4.36 40. The issue with him is like, well, who did he play? Well, he played 53 games in college. So he already has a huge benefit there. You know, we go back and look at the Dynasty Nerds study they did a couple years ago with that. You want your quarterback to have that, to have played at least started 35 games. There's another cat coming out this year, Cole Payton out of North Dakota State. And again, big athletic quarterback. I looked at the Relative Athletic Score website to see how he compared to Trey Lance. But Lance was injured and Lance didn't do any, there's no athletic testing for him. But Peyton he only started like 14 or 15 games. It's I would say he's very close to that Anthony Richardson model coming in, big and athletic. It's going to be nervous, but if I can get Tylen Green in the 3rd or 4th round and let him set for a year or two while he learns how to play, he didn't play super high level competition all the time, but you know, he seems to have, you know, he only completed about 60% of his passes in college. But he's big and he's fast, and that's going to go somewhere. A wide receiver that I thought was interesting out of Cincinnati, Jeff Caldwell, ran a 4.31 40 at 6'5", 216 pounds. But he had so little production in college. He just, like, athletically, he profiles very similar to Alec Pierce, but he just did not have the production that Alec Pierce had. He feels like a late round flyer that somebody's going to work real hard to try to develop. You know, they're going to start him with, hey, go deep. We'll get the ball down there to you, and then let's see if you can fill out the rest of your route tree. But at 6'5", running a 4.31, he can't teach that.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be interesting to see how things shake out the next 6 or so weeks. I guess it's maybe 7 or 8 weeks to the draft. I'm always fascinated to see what teams do in free agency too, because I think that tells you where they're looking in the draft, and you know who ends up not getting a chair in a game of musical chairs, like a quarterback or at receiver, running back. So be interesting to see. But you getting excited for free agency week that starts next week?
You know, I'm excited to see where the running backs go, because it is a pretty good free agent running back class. There are some teams with a lot of money. So, Chicago revamped their offensive line last year when Ben Johnson got there. So I'm curious to see, like, who makes a move like that where they like rebuild a unit so completely that it works. Chicago's offensive line got off to a slow start beginning the year while they built chemistry. But as the year went on, that offensive line played really, really well. DeAndre Swift had a great year. Caleb Williams had a great year. It was just one of those things where a lot of times you'll see teams bring in a bunch of free agents and they just don't gel. You got to be patient. Let it come together. Hope you get the right guys. I am excited to watch free agency and see how it goes.
Yeah, and there are a couple of
Are you muted, or did you? My computer crapped out.
It's a return to form.
It looks like you're saying we're done.
Yeah. I will wrap it up there. We will be back next Tuesday talking about free agency. Until then, you guys have a wonderful week.